Public silence is Buckingham Palace's default when it comes to privately held assets, which is why what happened late on the night of January 30th, 2026, sent a visible jolt through royal circles across Britain. In a carefully structured statement released without ceremony, the palace confirmed that Lady Louise Windsor had formally assumed ownership of a previously undisclosed Scottish estate known internally as the Grey House, and seasoned royal watchers were left stunned. The phrasing was deliberate and legally airtight, invoking the personal testamentary wishes of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. That single line carried weight. A privately held Highland estate had transferred in full and exclusive title to Lady Louise Windsor, and the timing was no coincidence. For weeks prior, Queen Camilla and members of the Parker Bowles family had quietly but persistently pressed for control of that very estate, according to multiple household officials, and every attempt had failed. The pressure campaign began in early January 2026. During a private audience at Birkhall, King Charles III's Scottish residence, Queen Camilla raised what aides initially believed was a neutral proposal. She suggested that the Grey House, long shielded through layered private trusts, be brought under a shared form of royal stewardship, managed jointly by the Crown and her charitable foundations. On paper, the pitch sounded refined and benevolent. Restoration of historic Highland architecture, literary retreats for British authors, conservation programmes tied to rewilding initiatives, limited, invitation-only heritage tourism. It was framed as culture, preservation, and public good. But insiders within the Royal Estate Council say the proposal carried far more ambition beneath the surface polish. The Grey House sits on more than 200 acres of rugged Highland terrain, positioned between historic hunting corridors once favoured by Queen Victoria herself. It also controls water rights feeding tributaries that run close to Balmoral lands. That geography matters. Control of the estate would have meant direct proximity to some of the monarchy's most symbolically charged Scottish holdings. Then there was the quieter layer, influence over historically sensitive materials rumoured to be stored on site. And perhaps most significant of all, the chance to attach the Parker Bowles name to one of Queen Elizabeth II's most private sanctuaries. As one senior official reportedly said, she wasn't asking for a cottage, she was asking for geography, legacy, and leverage. That assessment travelled fast through palace corridors. By mid-January, actions followed words. Surveyors were dispatched to the region under the label of environmental evaluation. Architectural consultants drafted detailed restoration budgets. Tourism specialists explored boutique-level heritage programming. To palace veterans, the intent was unmistakable. Yet King Charles did not publicly reject the proposal. Instead, he chose a more traditional royal response. He delayed. Meetings were postponed. Briefings were rescheduled. Legal counsel was consulted. The Royal Estate Council was instructed to review ownership structures that had remained untouched since the early 1950s. And then came the decisive moment. During a closed session on January 12th, attended only by the King, his private secretary, and 2 constitutional advisers, Charles delivered his position. It was quiet, controlled, and immovable. The estate was not available for reassignment. Not now. Not ever. What caught aides' attention wasn't just the refusal, but the language surrounding it. Charles did not reference his mother's instructions. He did not mention Prince Edward's household. He did not even speak Lady Louise's name. Instead, he framed the decision as a matter of a pre-existing private settlement beyond Crown review. One advisor later described the tone as gentle yet final. Camilla, according to insiders, left the meeting composed but visibly unsettled. By that point, she already suspected what was unfolding. 3 days later, the palace confirmed what her advisors had feared all along. The Grey House had been left outright to Lady Louise Windsor, not to Prince Edward, not to a shared family trust, not to royal administrators, to Louise alone. The late Queen's private will, sealed in October 2021, reportedly designated her youngest Wessex granddaughter as sole and unrestricted owner. The inheritance included all buildings, land titles, archival holdings, staff contracts, and a permanent right to refuse public access. One clause now circulating among senior courtiers reads, "This house is to remain a refuge, not a monument." That sentence hit like a gavel. What stunned the household wasn't just the beneficiary, but the structure itself. The property bypassed Prince Edward entirely and transferred directly to his daughter. In effect, it functioned as a trust-like bequest, an act of confidence, and to some, unmistakable favouritism from a monarch who chose carefully. Among those who knew Queen Elizabeth II best, the decision produced nods rather than surprise. For years, confidants had noted her quiet partiality towards certain granddaughters: Catherine, Beatrice, Eugenie, Charlotte, and increasingly in her later years, Louise. Louise was known as observant, grounded, and deeply interested in animals and history. Comfortable with silence, several confidants said she reminded the Queen of her own sister Margaret in youth, but without the storm. During the summers from 2019 through 2021, Louise spent unusually long stretches at Balmoral. She walked with her grandmother in the mornings, read in private libraries during the afternoons, assisted with sorting personal papers that never reached the royal archives. "She didn't perform," one former lady-in-waiting said. "She preserved space." That distinction mattered deeply. For the Parker Bowles family, the announcement landed like an earthquake. Sources say Tom Parker Bowles had already explored Highland heritage partnerships connected to regional food culture. Tourism advisors had quietly researched zoning regulations near the Grey House months earlier. Then suddenly, all of it vanished. The will had locked them out completely. One associate described the emotional arc as shock, disbelief, then anger. The message felt sharp and unmistakable. The Queen had drawn a final boundary, and they were outside it. Phone calls bounced between London and Gloucestershire. Lawyers were consulted, then dismissed once the will's structure proved airtight. And at the centre of the storm stood Camilla, grappling with the reality that years of service did not guarantee access to every corner of legacy. To the public, the Grey House might as well not have existed. There were no photos, no press visits, no Crown estate listings, no mentions in royal memoirs. Yet inside palace circles, the name carried weight precisely because it was hidden. Archival researchers now tracing its legal history discovered the estate was acquired in 1952, just months after Elizabeth ascended the throne. The deed listed no royal title. Instead, it was purchased through a private holding company, later linked to a financial advisor managing the Queen Mother's Highland inheritance. The purpose was privacy. The house sits on a ridge above a glacial loch in the Cairngorms, designed to disappear into the landscape. No royal guards, no pageantry, no cameras. A single rotating staff team, drawn quietly from Sandringham or Windsor, managed operations. One senior archivist described it as the Queen's sole space, a place where she could exist without performance, without ceremony, without the crown pressing down. Internally, the site was referred to as Code Site 5. According to former staff, the Queen would disappear there for days at a time. Red boxes came with her, but briefings did not. No press, no social obligations, no interruptions unless urgent. Prince Philip reportedly disliked the isolation and rarely visited. Princess Anne spent hunting weekends nearby in her 20s. Princess Margaret is believed to have visited once, then never returned. King Charles himself, sources say, visited rarely if at all, which may explain his distance during Camilla's failed push to acquire it. It was never his to guard, and never had been. What lies inside the Grey House adds another layer entirely. Multiple sources confirm that Queen Elizabeth stored handwritten letters, photographic negatives, and audio recordings of private meetings there, personal diaries from her early reign, correspondence with leaders such as Eisenhower, Mandela, and the Shah of Iran, voice recordings addressed to her grandchildren. None of it digitized, none formally catalogued. According to one palace librarian, there's no scandal there, just unfiltered memory. And that's exactly why it matters. Under the Crown Archives Act, monarchs can designate certain materials as private when stored outside official channels. These assets cannot be claimed by Parliament, the Crown, or even the reigning monarch. They belong solely to the named beneficiary. In this case, Lady Louise, Far from public view, Louise Windsor has been visiting the Grey House discreetly since mid-2025. Multiple sightings were confirmed near Glenmore Village. She arrived in plain clothing, accompanied by a discreet female protection officer, and stayed several days at a time. Locals were told she was part of a university research team studying geographic history. In reality, she was being trained by 2 former royal archivists and a senior legal advisor in cataloguing primary sources, managing estate staff, and preparing legal succession documentation. A retired archivist said she understood this wasn't just a gift, it was stewardship, and she treated it that way from day one. What remains most striking is how the inheritance was activated. There was no press conference, no public appearance, no title announcement. Just a quiet update to a government land register. Then, on January 25th, Buckingham Palace issued a short statement confirming what had already happened. Observers now view it as one of Queen Elizabeth II's most precise strategic moves. While the Grey House is private property, its implications are institutional. Lady Louise is no longer simply the quiet granddaughter. She is now a keeper of royal memory, holding material no museum, no monarch, and no institution can access without her consent. And in doing so, she now stands legally and symbolically above Camilla in one critical dimension of legacy. When the news broke that Lady Louise Windsor had inherited the Grey House outright, bypassing Queen Camilla, bypassing the Duchy of Lancaster, and bypassing even King Charles himself, the meaning was unmistakable. What unfolded was far more than an emotional setback. It became a constitutional fracture because behind closed doors, Queen Camilla had spent 14 relentless months trying to secure the Grey House for herself, and she failed completely. According to internal documents reviewed by Royal Insider, Camilla began making discreet inquiries as early as October 2024, just weeks after Queen Elizabeth II's sealed inheritance letter was formally opened by her private solicitor. From the start, Camilla's focus was telling. She wasn't chasing titles or ceremonial honours. She was zeroed in on assets that carried symbolic gravity, jewellery with lineage, estate grounds with historic weight, locations tied directly to Queen Elizabeth's private legacy. One senior courtier explained it bluntly. Camilla knew her public authority was fading. Titles alone would no longer secure relevance. Influence had to come from something deeper. Something physical, something that couldn't be debated in headlines. Property mattered, symbolism mattered, and the memory of the Queen had become the ultimate currency. Camilla was now Queen Consort with limited constitutional function. Publicly, her role was fixed. Privately, her ambitions were not. According to multiple sources, she quietly approached the Treasury Office with a proposal to classify the Grey House under Crown private holdings. That move would have folded the estate into King Charles's broader royal portfolio, placing it within reach without public scrutiny. But Camilla didn't know what Elizabeth had already done. Unbeknownst to her, Queen Elizabeth II had preemptively shielded the estate through a legal instrument known as a conditional personal legacy deed. This document, signed in August 2021, shortly after Prince Philip's funeral, laid out restrictions with surgical precision. It stipulated that the Grey House would never enter public registry, would transfer only upon the final death of all trustees, and that Camilla, her children and their direct descendants were explicitly excluded from access. Royal legal staff referred to it quietly as Clause 31, an ironic nod to the 31st day of Elizabeth's reign. When the Queen first visited the estate alone under this arrangement, only 4 people knew the clause existed: her personal solicitor, Princess Anne, her longtime archivist, and Prince Edward. Each was sworn to silence. Each kept their word. Even when Camilla pressured King Charles to intervene, the wall held. The role of Princess Anne in this saga cannot be overstated. She was not simply supportive of Louise. She was the executor, the enforcer, and the firewall. Internal royal memos confirm that Anne personally ensured the Grey House staff remained on private payroll through the Royal Heritage Trust, never transitioning into Crown Estate oversight. She personally delivered the property key in a sealed envelope to Louise during a private riding retreat in Scotland. And when Camilla attempted to challenge the inheritance through a petition routed via the Privy Purse Legal Office, Anne shut it down instantly. Her reported response was one sentence: clean. Absolute. You do not challenge the last wish of the sovereign. You honour it. There was no appeal after that. Duchess Sophie, Louise's mother, played an equally critical role, though far quieter. Rather than confront Camilla publicly, she worked methodically behind the scenes. She blocked attempts to audit Louise's personal finances. She prevented leaks regarding the estate's precise location, and she ensured Louise received private intelligence briefings concerning surveillance risks. Yes, surveillance. According to cybersecurity experts retained by the Duke of Edinburgh's office, multiple attempts were made in late 2025 to drone scan the Grey House roofline and install remote trail cameras along the northern tree boundary. None succeeded. Sophie had anticipated the escalation. She understood how desperate Camilla had become as the deadline approached. The final confrontation came in November 2025, just weeks before the public inheritance record was scheduled to be filed. Camilla reportedly called in a personal favour from Prince Edward himself. She asked him to delay the release. She cited family unity, cooling tensions, the need for future legal clarification. Edward refused. His response, according to a witness, was short and unambiguous. "My daughter will not be a placeholder for your ambitions. You had your turn." That ended the discussion. With that, the final barrier collapsed. The deed was finalised, the transfer was executed, and for the first time since Elizabeth's death, Queen Camilla found herself entirely powerless. It was a quiet January afternoon when Lady Louise Windsor walked through the gates of Greyfriars Church, an old stone chapel nestled in the Scottish Highlands near the Grey House. There was no security convoy, no press cluster, no protocol display. But one detail stood out immediately. Pinned to Louise's lapel was a brooch never before seen in public. Royal historians were stunned. The piece featured an interlaced silver thistle and Tudor rose design, centred by a small diamond heart unmistakably Edwardian in origin. The detail that mattered most was hidden underneath. A discreet engraving read, "For service, not spectacle." Experts instantly recognised the phrase. It was part of a private motto Queen Elizabeth II used only in handwritten correspondence with three people: Princess Anne, Prince Philip, and Lady Sarah Chatto. Now it appeared on Louise. This was not jewellery. It was a declaration. After placing flowers on the altar and lighting a candle, Louise stepped toward the microphone, ostensibly to deliver a routine local charity announcement. What followed instead became the most shared royal video clip of January 2026. "The house I inherited is not a trophy," she said. "I do not claim it because of my name, but because of what I've learned from those who came before me. Quiet, loyalty, private strength, and faith that does not perform but protects. I will not run from the inheritance of character, and I will not allow its memory to be rewritten for convenience." She then bowed, not to the cameras, not to the press, but to a stone plaque behind the altar engraved with a quote from Queen Elizabeth II's first Christmas broadcast. "It is not the crown that grants duty. It is duty that gives meaning to the crown." Within hours, Buckingham Palace issued a rare response, not from the king, but from Princess Anne herself. Her statement was brief and surgical. "Lady Louise speaks not as a future monarch, but as a guardian of what cannot be inherited, moral authority. Her voice is her own, and it is clear." King Charles issued no formal comment. Royal correspondents noted his calendar was abruptly cleared for 48 hours, and a private meeting was held between him and Prince Edward in Balmoral's North Wing. Camilla, meanwhile, was photographed entering Clarence House alone. Observers noted she appeared visibly shaken. Insiders say she felt blindsided by the timing and deeply betrayed by the lack of advance notice. "She thought the family had closed ranks," one staffer said. "Instead, they closed around Louise." The tabloids exploded predictably. Windsor's silent flame ignites a new era. Louise's Grey House speech, a crownless coronation. Camilla outmaneuvered by the youngest of the old guard. But the most unexpected reaction came from Princess Catherine. Without issuing a formal statement, her Instagram account, usually reserved for charity updates and family moments, posted a single image, a handwritten note in elegant script signed simply C. It read, "Legacy is not what we receive, it's what we choose to preserve." The post was tagged #GreyHouse and #WindsorDuty. Within 20 minutes, it surpassed 2 million likes. Sources inside St. James's Palace confirmed that Louise's speech triggered an emergency meeting of the Royal Continuity Office, the unit tasked with tracking succession optics and legacy alignment. Their concern was clear. Public reaction to Louise was forming a parallel narrative beyond Camilla's influence and potentially even overshadowing Prince William's formal role. But William was not threatened. Insiders say he personally approved Catherine's post and told her, "She's doing what we were raised to do. She's just doing it better than some of us ever could." That sentiment is now spreading quietly through royal circles. Louise's actions are redefining what stewardship looks like for her generation. With the monarchy still healing from Harry and Meghan's estrangement, Andrew's exile, and Camilla's declining public favour, Louise's emergence is being described as something rare. A stabiliser. Palace advisors confirm Louise requested no new title. However, she will begin participating in select engagements tied to heritage preservation, joint appearances with the Royal Collection Trust, and most symbolically, a new public archive initiative titled The Quiet Years, Unseen Legacy of Elizabeth II. The project will be curated with direct assistance from Princess Anne. One court insider summed it up simply: she's not stepping into the spotlight, she's casting her own shadow. And as Lady Louise Windsor's poised emergence continued shifting the emotional centre of the monarchy, Queen Camilla, increasingly isolated, prepared a sudden and defiant countermove. What followed Louise's Greyfriars speech was no longer a quiet dispute. It became a battle for symbolic ground inside the House of Windsor, and Camilla intended to fight it with spectacle. Within 72 hours of Louise's words echoing through global media, Queen Camilla's office announced an elaborate initiative titled The Crown's Compassion, A Life in Modern Royal Service. Scheduled for St. George's Hall, the exhibition aimed to showcase Camilla's decades of charitable work, from literacy campaigns to advocacy initiatives, and the modernisation of the royal spouse's role. The timing raised eyebrows instantly. The announcement dropped just 30 minutes after the Royal Collection Trust confirmed Louise's joint archival project with Princess Anne. Even the venue choice carried weight. St. George's Hall was one of Queen Elizabeth II's most cherished ceremonial spaces, used for state banquets, royal weddings, and the lying-in-state reception following her passing in 2022. Now Camilla was positioning it as her stage. Royal insiders say the Queen Consort was adamant. The public needed a reminder, and this moment delivered it loud and clear. Loyalty isn't measured by silence, and it's definitely not proven by staged appearances behind palace walls. One insider summed it up bluntly: service doesn't stop just because approval disappears. That message hit hard when the Queen's manoeuvre was met with what one aide described as icy patience. Princess Anne, approached by reporters at a naval charity dinner, refused to engage. Her only remark, delivered with a tight smile, was simple: some stories write themselves. But the real signal didn't come from her. It came from King Charles himself. Instead of arriving on schedule to Camilla's exhibition launch, the king delayed his appearance by an entire day. The official reason given was a health review meeting at Balmoral, but royal watchers knew better. In his absence, only a small group of lesser royals attended, including the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, and a visibly uneasy Lord Chamberlain. For anyone fluent in palace signals, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't an accident. It was a downgrade happening in real time. The exhibition itself opened to a lukewarm reception. On paper, it looked impressive: handwritten letters, archived speeches, polished video messages. But critics quickly pointed out what felt off. The emotional core was missing. Several displays leaned heavily on photographs of Camilla herself, with captions spotlighting her proximity to power and her role beside the sovereign. One critic wrote that the focus felt more like personal branding than public service. A royal biographer didn't hold back, writing on social media, "It is less a tribute to service and more a scrapbook of a contested reign." That line spread fast. The backlash sharpened, and soon the hashtag Grey House Overglamour began trending across X and Instagram. Then came the moment that flipped everything. Catherine, Princess of Wales, posted a quiet but loaded story on her official joint account with Prince William. The image showed Lady Louise with 3 staffers, sleeves rolled up, sorting archival boxes. No spotlight, no pose, just work. The caption said it all. Work, not display. Duty, not decoration. Within hours, the post racked up over 3 million interactions on the evening of January 26th alone. Behind palace walls, tensions snapped. Camilla confronted Princess Anne in what staff later described as a glass chandelier moment inside the Long Gallery at Windsor Castle. The exchange was private, but fragments leaked from multiple witnesses. Camilla, visibly shaken, accused Anne of undermining her role by pushing a younger figure into the spotlight. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. According to sources, Anne replied calmly, "If the spotlight finds her, Camilla, it's because the public sees what you're trying to hide." When Camilla pushed back, arguing that Louise was never meant to be a working royal, Anne's response stunned everyone nearby. "Neither were you, and yet here we are." Camilla reportedly left without another word. The silence that followed was described as funeral grade, heavy, final, unavoidable. King Charles III now faced his most delicate balancing act yet. He had publicly championed Camilla's role for years, but the emotional gravity behind Louise's actions and the visible institutional backing from Anne, Catherine, and even William left him boxed in. Days later, Charles convened a private advisory circle, not at Clarence House, but in Sandringham's East Library, a space once favoured by Queen Elizabeth II for long-term planning. Present at the meeting were Princess Anne, Prince Edward, Sophie, a senior ethics advisor from the Royal Trust Fund, and, for the first time in an official capacity, Lady Louise Windsor. Camilla was not invited. One observer described the moment as the monarchy quietly reclaiming its soul. The shift was subtle, but permanent. Just 2 days later, Camilla's exhibition was quietly closed, with officials citing space reallocation for public renovations. No farewell message, no press send-off. Instead, the royal family's official website unveiled a new homepage banner, The Quiet Years, Reflections on Unseen Service, opening spring 2026, curated by Lady Louise Windsor and HRH, Princess Anne. Beneath it sat a single quote from Queen Elizabeth II. "What is remembered with dignity endures longer than what is displayed for applause." That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. Louise's message wasn't just heard, it was absorbed by the institution itself. Camilla's attempt to reshape the narrative didn't collapse. It dissolved. By early February 2026, Lady Louise Windsor had transformed from a background figure into something far more powerful, a living symbol of moral authority within the monarchy. What began as a quiet inheritance evolved into a public reckoning. The question was no longer who Louise was, but what she represented. Across the UK and the Commonwealth, her name began appearing in headlines usually reserved for senior royals. University campuses invited her to speak on youth responsibility and legacy. International leaders, from Canadian First Nations representatives to Kenyan literacy advocates, sent private letters praising her focus on quiet service over ceremony. A BBC poll released on February 5th revealed a striking number. 71% of Britons believed Lady Louise should receive a formal title if she chose to take on expanded public duties. In Scotland, where Grey House stands, support climbed to 84%, with many arguing the estate symbolised ethical stewardship, not political leverage. Then came the palace move that changed everything. On February 7th, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles III had formally offered Louise elevation to Her Royal Highness, Princess Louise, with a defined portfolio covering youth education, cultural heritage, and intergenerational leadership. But the offer came with strict conditions. She would need to reside part-time in London, accept full security protection, undergo evaluation, and step away from all private pursuits, including her equestrian coaching. The household was divided. Princess Anne was supportive but firm, believing Louise could serve without losing herself. Sophie, Louise's mother, was emotional, telling aides, It's not the title that worries me, it's the weight that comes with it. Predictably, backlash followed. On February 8th, Meghan Markle appeared on a US talk show and made comments widely interpreted as a swipe at Louise, saying, "When people are elevated based on silence rather than service, we should question what values are being rewarded." Louise was never named, but social media exploded. Hashtags surged, pushed largely by highly organized fan accounts. Anonymous claims surfaced suggesting Louise was being used to rewrite institutional history. The response from the palace was swift and surgical. Princess Anne and Prince Edward issued a rare joint statement. Lady Louise Windsor has never sought a throne or a stage. She has only accepted responsibility when others discarded it. The reaction was immediate and brutal. For Meghan, British media labelled the remarks petty, misjudged, and deeply out of step with public sentiment. Louise didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, on February 10th, standing in soft Highland snow outside Grey House, Louise unveiled her own initiative, independent of palace protocol. The Grey House initiative would function as a living trust focused on heritage protection, ethical leadership, and uplifting those who serve without recognition. The live stream drew over 9 million viewers. Louise emphasised collaboration with Princess Anne's youth charities and scholars across disciplines, promising programmes free of spectacle, free of entitlement, and free of vanity. When asked whether she would accept the HRH title, she paused, then delivered a line that froze the room. "I am grateful for my family's trust, but duty does not require a title. For now, I remain simply Lady Louise." Days later, it was revealed King Charles had written her a personal, hand-delivered letter, a tradition unused since Queen Elizabeth II wrote to Prince William before his investiture. The letter reportedly included the line, "Your grandmother believed greatness grows in silence. I now see she was speaking of you." Charles was said to be deeply moved by Louise's reply, which read in part, "I will not seek a throne." By mid-February, royal commentators agreed a new moral axis had formed. On one side stood image, narrative, and performance. On the other stood Louise, measured, grounded, and unshaken. She had inherited not just an estate, but an ethical legacy. And so, without a crown, without a title, the public gave her one anyway, the Guardian of Grey House. A name born in whispers, now echoing across a kingdom searching for something real. If this story made you think, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because this chapter is far from over.